On the road to the White House, 3 candidates for the Republican presidential nomination addressed members of the New Hampshire state legislature today. We'll start with Ohio Governor John Kasich, followed by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, then Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Together, this is about 45 minutes.
Well, what a privilege and an honor to be here. I actually peeked in one day and never thought I'd be standing here and having an opportunity to speak to you. It just really illustrates and underscores the amazing life and journey that I've had in my lifetime as a first quarter freshman at Ohio State. I wrote a letter to the President of the United States, basically inviting myself down there for a chat, and it was carried by the President of Ohio State, who I had met just a short time earlier, and he wrote me back and invited me to a little meeting in the Oval Office. And I remember calling home, and my mother answered the phone, and I said, "Mom, I'm a first quarter freshman at Ohio State. My parents live in Pittsburgh. My father carried mail, and my mother's mother could barely speak English." And I said, "Mom, I'm going to need an airline ticket. The President of the United States would like to have a meeting in the Oval Office." And my mother is shouting, "Honey, pick up the phone. There's something wrong with our kid." From that experience, I had a couple jobs in Washington. One I got by hitchhiking. Lightning continued to strike me. And then when I graduated from Ohio State, I went looking for a job and couldn't find one. And the last place I thought I'd ever be hired was in the legislature. And I walked in and asked the guy, I said, "I want to go to law school, but I want to use my brain. Is there anything I can do?" He says, "Oh yeah, you can come here, I'll hire you. You can write resolutions about Aunt Gertrude, who just turned 105. And I said, "Well, that's great." And I went in, that was a Friday, I went in on a Monday, and they said they have a job opening for an aide to the Ohio senators. And so I went in and explained to them that I had basically run Washington, and they hired me, and I became an aide. And after a very short period of time, after writing bills for members, I thought, well, heck, I can do this myself. So I told my friends I was going to quit my job and run for the Ohio Senate. And one of them dropped his Coke, I'll never forget it, out of his hand. He said, "You can't do that." I said, "Well, just watch." And so I ran against an incumbent, by the way, and I was totally unknown. I started when I was about 24 and a half years old, and I was the youngest person ever elected to the Ohio Senate at the age of 26. So I became a legislator, and I loved it. And I was there for 4 years, and in the third year that I was there, the Republicans won the majority, but the Democrats still controlled the Ohio House. And that's when I learned it's better to get along than to fight. It's better to solve problems and spend your time arguing with one another, because what's the point of service if you don't achieve anything? And then after 4 years, thank you. After 4 years, because of my cooperative efforts, the Democrats gerrymandered me out of my seat. So, so I had an opportunity to run against an older fellow who was really a mentor of mine, or run for Congress. So I decided to run for Congress, and I started that, I guess, when I was about 29, and at the ripe old age of 30. I was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, and I remember that night with my mom and dad being there, and they said, "Johnny, what are you doing?" It was amazing. So, my first meeting, by the way, in the Ohio Senate, I'll never forget it. We had a committee meeting. It was in the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I had been in for, a couple weeks, and I go to the meeting, and the Republican, who's in the minority, starts offering an amendment, and the chairman says, "Is there a second?" And I didn't even understand what the amendment was, and there was a person who was more senior to me, he didn't second it either. So he banged the gavel, he said, "Is there a second?" And nobody ever seconded. So it died. He slammed the gavel, he said, "Motion dies, the committee is adjourned." And this guy turns to me, never forget it, Senator Finan, beat red face, and he says, "Why didn't you second my amendment?" I said, "I didn't understand what it was." He says, "Young man, you better learn to fly by the seat of your pants." And I've been doing it ever since I got that advice. So I wanted to tell you this. I believe in running our country from the bottom up. Coming from a place where if the wind blew the wrong way, we found ourselves out of work. I've always believed that power ought to vest right where people live, and that we should run our country from the bottom up. I've always felt that tax cuts were really an issue of putting power in people's pockets in the community, in the family, in the neighborhood. I always thought that, and still believe that's the most important thing we can do in terms of empowering people. And then I have a whole program here, and a lot of which I launched. You know, I was Budget Committee Chairman in Washington when we balanced the budget. I was the chief architect. I'd spent 10 years of my life fighting for it, interrupted at one point by Congressman Tim Penny, who was a Democrat, and he was given an opportunity to cut spending and came to me and asked if we could put a coalition together, and we did. And we came up with a plan to cut 1 penny out of every dollar of federal spending. And we offered it on the floor of the United States House, and we lost by 4 votes. It was an amazing effort with a group of Republicans and Democrats working together to fight and take 1 penny out of every dollar. Who fought us? Republicans, Democrats, everybody. But we came close, and then soon after that, we got to a balanced budget, and we paid down the largest amount of debt in modern time, and almost $500 billion. But my efforts to try to transfer power, money, and influence out of Washington was halted because of a president with a somewhat different philosophy. So what would I do if I were president? Well, you'd get a lot of power in a short period of time. You'd get welfare. In our state right now, we are trying to say that if somebody wants to get some education and training to meet their 30-hour work requirement provided for under the federal welfare law, which I, by the way, was intimately involved in writing, that I have to go to Washington now and ask them for permission to get somebody trained so they can get the skills to get out of welfare. Now, why am I going to Washington to ask somebody what our welfare rules and ethics ought to be in the state of Ohio? See, to me, you take the program. You get the program back here, you write the rules. And I'd make one little recommendation. The recommendation is bring businesses into the welfare office so that when people get help, they also have somebody there that tells them if you get trained, you can get a job working for me. I think it's really critical, but welfare should reside with all of you. Education. There are 104 federal education programs. I'd put them in 4 buckets, and I would send them back here, including 1 bucket that would cover special education, an issue that you all struggle with every single session. But you ought to have the power of education here. And one thing I would say to you, and that is we have had an education system that's trained people for jobs in the past. When we were kids, many of us, not all of us when we were kids, we didn't have to get that great of an education. We could graduate and get a job in a steel company, a textile plant, a chemical company, a cement factory, and we could make a decent living. That was the middle class. But many of those jobs are gone. And now our education system has to begin to train people for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. It's going to require a dramatic change in the way that education works. The president can't fix it, the governor can't fix it, maybe the legislature, but all the way down to the school board and the community level, we have to empower them and hold them accountable at the state level for the skills that our children are able to receive. Job training. Right now, you know, you have to basically lose a job before they'll train you for another job. I'd like to give you the job training money. And you know my idea is, why don't we train you when you're on the job so you don't lose your job, so that we don't have to train you for a job that may not even exist. So we'll give you the job training money, and you use it, and you figure out what you want to do with it right here in the state of New Hampshire. Transportation, you know how it works now? We pay federal gas tax. We send the money to Washington to a committee. The committee devises their own plans and then sends less back to us. And by the way, puts restrictions on the way in which we take care of our infrastructure. What I suggest, send a couple pennies down to Washington to maintain the interstate, and then we keep the rest of the money. And we do with it what we want to do with it. And you know, the idea that you cannot toll a road where there's a dime of government money in it, federal money, it's absurd. The idea of tolling to me makes sense, but I will tell you, with less rules and less restrictions, those dollars will go a lot farther. So let's just stop that nonsense of sending it down to that committee. Who's against it, by the way? The committee. Who else is against it? The special interests that want to get their snouts in the trough. I know they'll have their snouts in the trough here, but at least you can beat them out of it a little bit easier than you can in Washington. And also Medicaid, the programs for the poor and the disabled. I want to commend you. We cannot turn our back on the mentally ill, the drug addicted, the working poor, the developmentally disabled. We're all made in the image of the Lord. Yeah, I took $14 billion over the next few years back to Ohio from Washington to meet our challenges, and you did it in New Hampshire. Lives have been saved. People have some hope. You did it here. I want to compliment you for it. In our Medicaid program, by the way, we took the growth of Medicaid from 10%, which is the toughest issue for you to control, in my second budget down to 2.5% without cutting one benefit or taking one person off the roll. And the single biggest change we made is we let mom and dad stay in their own home rather than being forced into a nursing home where they're healthier, happier, more independent. Oh yeah, we had to beat down the nursing home lobby, but we were able to get it done. And by the way, in our state, just so you know, I inherited a deficit of $8 billion, almost 20% of our operating budget. We're now running a $2 billion surplus. We've cut taxes more than any state in America, $8 billion worth of tax cuts. Our credit is rock solid. Our outlook is positive. Our pensions are solid and within the 30-year requirement. And we're up 385,000 jobs after having lost 350,000, and we've diversified our economy. Why? Well, because we've been bold. The legislative leaders have been terrific. We've all worked together, and we've accomplished a lot. But in addition to praising you on what you did on Medicaid, and I think you should control the programs of the poor, and I would get the Medicaid dollars back with only provision that you spend it on what it's designed for, not to pave highways. Spend it on what it's necessary to be spent on and be creative. I think that that is absolutely terrific. But I also want to point to you about the struggle that we all face. For 6 years, I've been working on this drug issue. Before I was even sworn in as governor, I met a group of ladies who came to see me who all had pictures of their children in frames. And they all had one thing in common. Every one of their children were dead from a drug overdose. And so 6 years ago, we started closing down pill mills and taking doctors' licenses and locking up the drug dealers. But we've now moved to creating protocols, which I would encourage you to look at, that would describe exactly what the proper allocation of prescription drugs are if you have acute pain or chronic pain. And we also have programs in the schools. And by the way, the beautiful thing about running for president and being here and having our people share ideas with your people, and yes, last night I picked up a great idea, and that's how you're going to say that the health education programs in New Hampshire schools are going to require education about the drug issue. I called my folks last night and I said, this looks like such a great issue. This is a great way to get, because we got to be in the classroom. But here's what I really want to leave you with on this issue, or on all issues. Republican and Democrat doesn't matter on this, does it? Our children are dying. Our people are at risk. And you know, it's okay. I fight with the best of them. You know, I can fight with anybody. And sometimes I will have a strong opinion on something. But doesn't it feel great when we as human beings have the privilege of serving in a legislative or executive role, but particularly in a legislative role, when we come together as people, as moms and as dads, to solve a problem. Then you leave the chamber, you get in your car and you go home, and your spouse says, what did you do? And you can tell them that you did something great for the boys and the girls who live in this state because you work together. We can have our differences, ladies and gentlemen, and I've been in this business a very, very long time, a reform-oriented guy. But you know, what I know is when we are Americans, when we're citizens of New Hampshire more than we are a political party or a philosophy, when we work together to solve problems, we leave a legacy that our children and our grandchildren in your own families will remember. If I'm president, I'm coming back here. I'm coming right back here. And I'm going to share with you the things that I learn all over the country. Because it's a job of a president to share, to lead, to inspire, to be patient, to work together, and to share the great ideas. Because the states of America are the laboratories of innovation, the laboratories of change, and the laboratories of excitement. It's a privilege for me to be before you today. God bless you. Good luck, and thank you.